Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Hampstead Synagogue Online. And this is, as they say on television, the last in the current series of Where Are We Now? For those of you who are watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, a very warm welcome to you. And as a way of explanation, Hampstead Synagogue is an Orthodox Jewish community based in London, England. We were founded in 1892 and have one of the in our original building and one of the so-called cathedral synagogues of the United Kingdom. The series was started in May, the 19th of May, and we had Marie van der Zyl from the Board of Deputies, you may recall. And we then had Stephen Pollard, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. He was followed in June with Jonathan Goldstein, the Jewish Leadership Council, Naomi Dickinson, Laurie Rackhind, and Her Honor Judge Rachel Karp on the 30th of June, Michael Goldstein from the United Synagogue on the 16th of July, and last week we had a panel, Michael Etherton from the UK Jewish Film, Francis Jeans from Jewish Museum London, Jonathan Nathan, the Jewish theatre correspondent, and Raymond Simonson from JW3. So to all our contributors, thank you so much indeed, and thank you all for watching. My name is Gabriel Herman, and together with Madeline Abramson, who you'll be meeting later in the evening, we are co-chairs of the Hampstead Synagogue. I mentioned that John Nathan, the Jewish Chronicle's theatre correspondent, was with us last time, and in this week's edition of the Jewish Chronicle, he was in reflective mode about his experience with us last week. And to quote from him in his article, he said, "During the Hampstead Synagogue's webcast, I banged on about the sterling work being done by producers such as Andrew Lloyd Webber." And he concludes, "It turns out that the war of COVID is psychological as it is medical. It is up to us to prevent that kernel of fear from getting the better of us and to bravely, when the time is right, pull on our masks, keep our distance, and get back to the theatre where we belong." And I think now we're beginning to be a little bit more reflective of the not only of our current situation now, post lockdown, but also much more about thinking about the future. So when we talk about where are we now, I think it's about our thinking about that future. And I'm hoping, I'm the nocturnal optimist, that we're going to have a very positive session tonight with our two very special guests who are both columnists and journalists. And if I may introduce them to you now. First up, we have Miriam Shalviv. And Miriam is a columnist for the Jewish Chronicle and the paper's former opinion editor and foreign editor. She was previously the Knesset correspondent and literary editor of the Jerusalem Post, features editor of the Times Higher Education magazine, and a contributor to Times of Israel. In her current day job, she is owner of a marketing company for aesthetic clinics.
That's right.
You can tell us a bit about aesthetic clinics in a few moments.
Completely different topic.
Okay. And to Jennifer Lippman, welcome to you, Jennifer. This is the shortest biography I've ever had to read, but maybe we'll go into a little bit more detail. Jennifer Lippman is a freelance journalist and columnist for the Jewish Chronicle. She's also an associate director at a leading independent communications agency, Lexington. And that's all I have for you, Jennifer. So thank you both for coming. And I think you did share roles. You were both column editors for the Jewish Chronicle at one time. Is that right?
Yes, and we briefly worked together quite a few years ago now. So it's nice to see Miriam.
Lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So here's a challenge to you both. I want really upbeat, positive stuff here, okay? No misery, no. Now I know it's going to be pretty difficult, but I'm going to try to keep that upbeat message so that we can end on a high, as it were. And don't forget, all those watching on the internet, you can comment and specifically ask questions of our two guests. Just use your chat facility wherever you may be, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, and we'll be delighted to put your questions directly to Jennifer and Miriam. Now, what are we going to do tonight? Well, I thought that I would throw back the words of the journalists back to them and see whether or not we could start a discussion and a debate about things that they have previously commented about, particularly and over the last few months. And I was particularly struck by an article that you wrote, Jennifer, way back in March, end of March the 27th. And the headline was, "We can change for the better after this crisis." And I just want to quote a few things. I'm not going to obviously read the entire article out, but it gives a bit of a flavor. And that maybe allow us to have a quick discussion about what you were thinking then, what you're thinking now, and also to bring Miriam into the discussion. So if I can start by quoting this. "One glimmer of hope is that this crisis has a positive effect on us as a Jewish community, not just now, but after. Will we continue to look after our most vulnerable when the need feels less existential? Will we still check on elderly neighbors, offer help with errands after the storm has passed? And as an often, albeit not exclusively privileged group with many members in senior business roles, how will we prevent the most deprived from losing out the most? Will we go above and beyond?" Jennifer, I think you got the mood absolutely right at the time. I think a lot of communities, and I'm talking about synagogue groupings, went out of their way to really reach out to the most vulnerable. Are you getting any sense that that's disappearing now, or do you think that this is very much an ongoing thing that's going to continue?
So I would definitely like to think that it's an ongoing thing that is going to continue. There's a phrase that's sort of being bandied around at the moment by the government and by others, which is sort of building back better. And although, you know, it's sort of trite, I think it actually is a very kind of important way of looking at things, that, you know, we are in a horrible situation. And of course, the Jewish community has suffered quite a high share of losses. And, you know, a number of families, a number of communities have been really directly affected. And I think we're never going to be the same again. I don't think that's, you know, possible. I think this is a seismic shift. But I do think, you know, I've seen firsthand people in my community and in others have really, you know, got out to help their neighbours, you know, people doing each other shopping, checking on elderly members of the community, that sort of thing, which, although, you know, it's basic stuff, it's the sort of thing that actually community is founded on. And I think it's really positive, and I think it's something that hopefully we can do much more of in the coming years. I wrote a column at the start of this year, so long before we even really knew anything about coronavirus, talking about sort of resolutions for the 2020 decade. And actually one thing I said was that I think Tikkun Olam should be underpinning everything that happens in Judaism over the next decade. And I think, if anything, this has really shown the importance of that and the need for our community to celebrate that aspect of it. And I just sort of add, before I pass over to Miriam, that I think things like, for example, the food bank work being done at JW3 are fantastic, and they're absolutely what our community should be doing and should be proud of.
Thank you for that. Miriam, in your own community, have you noticed this reaching out, and is it still continuing?
Absolutely. I think there's been an enormous outpouring of community spirit and community support and goodwill. You can see it in the charities. You can see it on the personal level. Literally, neighbors getting together on a really personal level. This has been fantastic. We moved into a new neighborhood 2 years ago. Didn't really know our neighbors, and over this period of lockdown, suddenly we're all getting to know each other. So really, literally down to that level, it's been an enormous outpouring of community support and goodwill and good intentions and positivity. However, and I don't want to be the negative side here, but I'm going to anyway. Jen, you said at the beginning, you know, it all depends what happens after. And I think that an enormous amount depends really on when is that after? So I think there's a very big difference in a crisis, coronavirus and economic, that lasts 6 months to a year, and something that goes on for 2-3 years. And what we're already seeing is that there's a very big difference between individual goodwill and really communal goodwill, and actually being able to act on that in a really sustained manner. Because, of course, community organizations need money. They need funds. And, of course, this is an enormous economic crisis. And so with all the goodwill in the world, I think that we're all going to have to make, as a community, some very difficult choices about who we can help, how we can help them, what to invest in, and difficult times ahead.
I think you're right, but I think that it was really much a grassroots effort. You're right, a lot of the initiatives were taken at head office in synagogue or organizations, but actually a lot of it was phone rounds by members to members. And I heard wonderful stories there.
And I don't think that's gone away. And I think that it's to everyone's credit that really, how many months are we down the line since February, several months down the line, really when we've all been through a trauma, that I think that spirit is really still there.
Thank you. Jennifer, I'm going to remind you, go further down into your article, because there's something else that you said, again, very much of the moment. It's basically says, let me think about it. Equally, will we use this strange moment to embrace new ways of doing things, not least by integrating technology into the core of Jewish life? Such innovation could surely be a lifeline to shrinking communities, or a way to engage those who don't feel comfortable attending traditional services. We're going to go into more detail about this later on, but it was quite remarkable, wasn't it, how quickly the community started to use technology.
Absolutely. And I think it's been really fantastic. I mean, obviously things like this, a few months ago would have been sort of quite unusual. We had sort of live streamed events, but usually only when they were sort of big political debates or something like that. So it's really fantastic to see. But I do think there's definitely more that could be done. And I hope what comes out of this is that, there's Judaism within our synagogues and in person, and I absolutely want that to come back. I have a 1-year-old and I'm desperate for toddler services to be back to normal. I'm desperate to be back mingling in a kiddush and, there physically. But I also know that there's lots of people who can't do that, or, who don't get home from work in time to go to a Friday night service, but would like to tune in, or people who simply just don't have the ability to live near a shul and get involved. And I think that there is a really important lesson, or not lesson, but sort of outcome that we can see, which is that we start to think about how we're doing things and what we can modernize within the spirit of Jewish law.
And Miriam, I know that you are working in the industry and technology and things in that way. Have you been surprised by the speed by which things have taken off?
I think that, yes, I think obviously it was impressive. Most of our organizations pivoted very, very quickly. And that was definitely, it was a good thing. To a certain extent, they had to. And I do agree with Jen that there's going to have to be a lot more adjustment, because realistically, the challenge for the community is that most people are not going to be able to go back to shul so quickly. And as I'm sure we'll be discussing later, schools may suffer as well. And technology is going to have an enormous role in helping to supplement what both those institutions used to do and will do in different ways. Looking at the positive thing here, I really think that it's been incredible. I don't think essentially that when the shuls and the schools do really get back to functioning smoothly, that the technology will just be for the people who cannot participate in those things. I think that it has changed our community culture in a deep way, and our expectations. Again, speaking on a personal level, for the first time in many years, I belong to a shul. I'm very active in a shul, obviously schools as well, with my children. But it's been delightful for me, really, to be able to watch different events that different shuls have put on. Obviously participating in ones like this, but also being able to see services and events, not just here in the UK, in overseas as well. And I think that it's giving people a lot more choice about what they want to access and how. And I also really like the fact that it gives you a lot more, you can basically sample different rabbis, different types of events. And I think that that is going to be a long-term change in the community for everyone, and not just for those who can't access physical facilities.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, you just saw a comment on the screen just now, and we've had previous comments from other people who actually travel up to Hampstead Synagogue, especially to come to a service, particularly the Slichot, the midnight choral service that we did last year. And they miss coming to Hampstead, but now they don't have to because we're live on screen, and they're really appreciating it.
Well,
Jennifer,
so if I can just say one more thing, I think it's really noticeable that one good thing for the shuls is that actually online events and services tend to draw larger crowds. I wrote in a separate piece about the Kabbalat Shabbat service in Hampstead Garden Synagogue, where they're doing, which they've also been doing online, and the numbers there are enormous. They were having 200 people, more than 220 people.
Miriam, we'll come to that in a minute because you wrote an article, as you quite rightly said. But I just wanted to remind Jennifer of how she ended her article, and you said this:
Sure.
This unprecedented. Don't worry, it's fine. This unprecedented crisis could be a chance to build Jewish life in Britain as it could be and become a stronger community, one that remains giving and generous, but becomes more flexible, innovative, and dynamic. Then we can tell our children about the aftermath of this war and the good it led to. And I thought that was a very interesting observation, because this is not a war. This is not the Second World War and the terrible tragedies that came on in that era. But yet there are kind of similarities and completely different phenomenon as well. I don't recall in this country having to close the synagogues during the Second World War, where they had to close now. But I think that it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? Are we all depressed and want to go back to the shul? But there's not going to be that declaration, right, we're all open again. It feels like a phony war at the moment. Do you get that sense? Or do you get a sense that once if it's all declared safe, we're all going to go back to how we were?
I mean, I think it's going to take a long time. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I would love to have a crystal ball. But I think it's going to take a long time, even without the question of whether there will be a second spike or anything like that. I think it's going to take a lot of time for everyone to feel comfortable being together in a small space. And, you know, so I was tonight, I should have been in Israel at one of my very good friends' weddings, which obviously is not happening. And you know, I was talking to some friends the other day and saying, how long is it going to be before we're comfortable being in a big wedding, dancing together, you know, crammed into a small space? And I think it's a long way off. I think it's going to be gradual. I think we're going to start out with people doing small services at distance, and perhaps gradually those sort of barriers will break down. But it is very strange. And, you know, we're looking ahead to Rosh Hashanah in a couple of months' time. The idea of not having Rosh Hashanah services, I've never not been to shul on Rosh Hashanah, and the idea of not doing so is very odd. But equally at the moment, the idea of doing so as I've always done seems very jarring and something that I can't quite possibly imagine.
It's very strange times. But by the way, the picture behind you, I can see a lot of social distancing in that image. I don't know whether you chose it specially.
Maybe.
Miriam, I'm going to come to you now, and it was something that you kind of mentioned a few seconds ago anyway, because you wrote another fascinating piece of writing, and this is entitled "The Benefits of Zoom Judaism Are Too Good to Lose." And this was written in May the 15th, and it started quite lovely. It said this: "It's become our Friday afternoon ritual. Every week we set up a computer in the kitchen and let the dulcet tones of Chazan Avromi Freilich of Norris Lee Synagogue waft through the room as he sings his way through the Kabbalat Shabbat service, and we put the finishing touches to our roast potatoes and chicken soup. We usually hum along in Edgware while Chazan Freilich dances around his house in Golders Green. It's become one of the highlights of our week, and I'm going to miss it desperately now that the coronavirus crisis seems to be winding down and communal life gradually returns to, quote, normal. You see, while many in the community seem to be waiting eagerly for synagogues to reopen, I've rather enjoyed Zoom shul. I may even be a Zoom Jew. And so that's another interesting observation. Are we simply changing our habits, and will they come back? And should the synagogues think about this blended approach of saying, we're going to try to do our best in synagogue and give you the experience that you remember, although not quite, but we're also going to be very wary that there are many members who can't come to shul, and we should be putting on Zoom activities as well, and particularly Zoom services.
Well, look, I think shuls have been around for millennia, so I think it's a little early to write off shuls. But
thank goodness for that.
But I do think things will change, because I think that it's inevitable. Over the last few months, people have had different experiences. First of all, our habits are broken, right? It's much easier to break a habit than to establish one. And for many people, even people who are quite regular shul goers, they haven't been to shul for months now. And I think that getting them back is going to take a lot of very hard work on the shuls, for the shuls. But it's not just getting them back to the exact same thing that was before. I think if that's what the shuls try to do, and I don't think they will actually, then that would have been an enormous mistake. Because people have had other experiences in the meanwhile, right? Some people haven't been to shul at all. And in the meanwhile, they might have realized, that it might just seem less attractive to them, to be frank. Whereas many other people have been to Zoom services, maybe even different denominations, different types of shuls. They've experienced being up, for example, as a woman, I really like the fact that in a Zoom service, I don't feel like I feel closer to the action. It's been very good for me. And of course, many other people are having little small minyanim in their gardens, socially distanced, of course. And that's a different experience. I think lots of people have really enjoyed that kind of more intimate davening. And you see the same thing in Israel. There's a lot of discussion there. People were having minyanim on their balconies, and it's really opened people's eyes up to a different type of experience. And I think that it would be foolish for us to simply try and do what we did before, because people have changed. That's first of all, they've had different experiences in the interim. And a lot of people have simply fallen out of the habit of going to regular shuls, and the shuls are going to have to work very hard to entice people back, which I think is a good thing. But I think you asked for the positives. I think that is a positive thing, because it means that the shuls will have to be, by definition, more responsive and more to people and their needs, and more creative. So I actually think that's one of the really good things that's come out of this.
I think you're absolutely right. And a Zoom service has quite a strange feel to it. We put on a Kabbalat Shabbat service. And by the way, that's a welcoming to the Sabbath musical service for those people out of town. And the Zoom meeting doesn't differentiate between men and women. They're all together on the screen. And I just wondered how that felt. Did that feel much more inclusive to the traditional experiences that you and Jennifer would have experienced in shul?
I loved it. For me,
Miriam, yeah. So I'm going to bring Jennifer in if you wanted to.
Sure. So I have to confess, I haven't dialed into shul services simply because usually they happen over bath and bedtime for my little boy, so it tends not to work time-wise. But what we did do, and it was very unofficial in the first few months of lockdown, was we did a sort of kind of very grassroots Zoom toddler service with a bunch of other friends who had small children in the community. And it was really lovely, but it was hard. Small children, as anyone who has them or works anywhere near them, don't do brilliantly with computer screens. They try and grab things. So it wasn't, it wasn't the same, but it was still a kind of small piece of normality that we could cling on to. And actually it was really valuable. But I think what I would say is that I don't think for me it replaces the kind of being there in person, because I like to just have it wash over me, as opposed to necessarily that kind of active participation, which is very much a personal preference. But I think Miriam's point about kind of shuls having to work harder is a really important one, because, and I've written before that, we know that people in their 20s are not joining shuls. The suddenly membership is kind of it's a nice to have potentially, but it's not seen as something we absolutely will do. Myself and many of my friends have chosen to join shuls only at the point which we've had children and not before. And I think there's a sort of fundamental question for shuls to answer over the next few years, which was there anyway, but I think coronavirus and the aftermath actually gives a kind of impetus to do so, which is how do you offer something to a different generation who isn't just going to join as you would expect, who isn't going to just do as their parents did, and what can you do to make it valuable for them to be part of the community? And I think there's lots of different things. I've talked before about sort of childcare and nurseries and making that sort of a really incremental part of the community. But I think shuls do need to be having those conversations. They should have been having them anyway, but I think this is a great opportunity for that.
Thank you very much for that. But actually, that's nothing new. Hampstead Synagogue was founded in 1892. Partly to address that issue. How do we engage with a new congregation, a more modern congregation? So the progressives tried it. We're always going to struggle with that question, but we always have to keep trying. So I think that's interesting. On the article, Miriam, you said the biggest mistake shuls can make is to revert reflexively to the way things used to be done. I think much to Jennifer's point here. Pre-corona. This is a chance to rethink and reimagine the synagogue experience, finding creative ways to preserve what's best about coronavirus worship. I like that phrase, coronavirus worship, like the accessibility, inclusiveness, informality, and even intimacy. Have you given that any more thought? I mean, how does that going to look in your mind?
I think, and I hesitate to say this with that beautiful background behind you, but I think one trend that we're going to see is big shuls are going to find it harder. I think that we're going to see a return to smaller prayer groups, smaller minyanim, a lot more independent prayer groups. I always think about, in Manhattan, for example, there's lots of little small groups that have very independent senses of identity, and they've developed their own styles of the shuls that they like, and it's really a lot more about their own self-expression. And I think that is what's going to happen here, because people who are still going to shul have become used to, like I said, to more creative and more soulful prayer, essentially. And I think they're going to want to see that replicated. Now, I think that's going to be a challenge for the big shuls. I think we are going to see a proliferation of small, independent prayer groups. I don't think that's something, though, that the big shuls have to say, well, okay, then we're finished, because they can help accommodate this. They can host some of these things, but they have to be nimble and agile and willing to do it. And I do think, again, coming from a business side, that very often large organizations find that kind of pivoting more difficult. And sometimes actually the advantage is with the smaller groups that have, they can just change direction more quickly. But it doesn't mean it can't be done. But I think that is really the challenge for the big shuls, to be able to accommodate that kind of smaller, more creative approach. I think some people at least will want.
Sure. I think that what's interesting to me is if you look at the statistics of people watching things online, people are attracted not to the guest speakers, however wonderful they are. It's actually services. You'll see that the numbers really shoot up for choral services right around the world. So there seems to be almost a global appetite for this. And if we, the cathedrals, synagogues that we represent, and there are other around the world, I think will still have a place and perhaps a global market. But how we actually position that is going to be very, very interesting. And again, Jennifer, you'll sound me out on this. The move from the big synagogues to the small communities, small congregations, have been going on for years now.
Sure, yes. I mean, I have to say I don't know masses about that, but I think it will be a mix. I think some people will want, as Miriam has said, that smaller community network. But I think plenty of people will still have a place for the bigger shuls, provided they're kind of adapting and offering, whether it's the activities or whether it's the style of services, more modern, more snappy services. I think there will definitely still be a place for that, but I think shuls need to be talking to their members and asking what they want, and perhaps also to their non-members, reaching out beyond that, speaking to those Jews who kind of get involved in other communal activities but don't get involved in the shuls, and asking what they would want to see.
Look, sorry, Miriam, yeah, come.
Sorry, can I just add one thing? That there's another opportunity here, really, for all shuls. If you look at who's logging into some of these online things, it's people from all over the world. Like I said before, I'm logging into things going on in North America now, going on in Israel, shuls that I don't belong to. And I think that shuls have to change their mentality a little bit. That yes, in the building, you're going to have local people, right? And of course, they have to be your priority. Of course, you have to serve those. But there is an opportunity here to interact and influence the lives and the Judaism of people in many different communities. I really question whether, I really think that the definition of a local synagogue is going to change, right? Which is a challenge for the synagogues, but it's also an opportunity to reach out further, to influence more people. And again, I think that can be a good thing if the shuls can take advantage of it.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to have a look at two more articles, one from Jennifer and one from Miriam. Your opportunity still remains if you want to ask questions to start using your chat facilities, and we're going to take a break now. Welcome back. It's all getting very professional now. I'm kind of getting into this. In fact, if we look at the archive of this series, it was a bit ropey right from the beginning. And I was actually wearing black tie. And I said the reason I was wearing black tie is because I couldn't think of a time in the future that I'd get a chance to wear it again soon. And I said, by the end of the series, I'll be wearing a T-shirt like everybody else. And that's why I'm wearing a T-shirt tonight. So just to prove that I was thinking about it right from the beginning. Welcome back, as I say. And we're going to have a look at some other articles as a way of discussing this particular time and also thinking about the future. And Jennifer, you wrote another quite personal article in May of this year, May the 11th to be precise, and it was entitled "A Proper Jewish Wedding is Worth Waiting For." And you started off by saying, I got married in February, not typically a month associated with weddings, so mazel tov for that. And then it was
several years ago.
And then you go on to say, weddings have been banned until further notice, as they should be. And we all recall the Haredi community where there were some issues there about them not socially distancing and keeping weddings going. But that calmed down. Still, the situation is frustrating for any couple who'd been planning to tie the knot. A friend due to wed in August is sanguine but nonetheless disappointed, hoping against hope they make it down the aisle in 2020. Can you give us an update about that?
Well, as I said, I was supposed to be at that wedding tonight, and it's obviously not happening. Much as I'm delighted to be here, I would probably rather be dancing the night away in Israel. But I mean, there's still hope. I think there's a lot of uncertainty for any couple who are getting married this year or were due to be. And I think, weddings are happening and people are kind of working out ways to do it. But it is very hard for those couples. You plan a wedding for a long time. And absolutely, a wedding isn't a party. A wedding is the ceremony. It's what it means. But it's also about celebrating in a communal fashion. It's about having your loved ones there as you walk, as the bride walks around the groom. It's about the dancing on chairs, and it's about that atmosphere. And it doesn't matter if you normally would have only had 30 people or 300 people at your wedding. I think having that ability to do that is something we've taken for granted for so long. And it's very hard for couples who are in a position where they're not able to do that now, and they're really looking at, when am I going to be able to do that again? Is it going to be next summer, or is it going to be something that people really never feel comfortable doing again?
Miriam, your thoughts about weddings?
This is where I really disagree with you, actually. I'll tell you why. Because I think that I've had a wedding. I had that big wedding, so I really actually do obviously sympathize with those couples. But I think that this is one of the best things that's come out of this whole crisis, that we have become used now over the last 6 months to having much smaller, more intimate weddings, and the same thing for bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. I think that the whole trend of having these enormous, expensive weddings, these massive parties for boys turning 13 and girls turning 12 was absolutely out of control and overblown. Couples were spending ridiculous amounts of money, and it was actually a travesty. And what we're seeing is a communal refocusing of priorities. And I think that people have really appreciated some of the smaller weddings now, really with just literally 10 people, 20 people. And they've come to understand how meaningful that can be. And I think that is a really, really good refocusing of our values as a community. And I will have to say as well that as a mother who's got a kid who is going to be bat mitzvah next year, there's a bunch of parents saying, I really wish that all my kids were having bar and bat mitzvahs right now, because we won't have to spend 20,000, 30,000 pounds on it. And I actually really think, we can laugh about it, right? But actually, I think that's a real thing. People were literally taking out money, going into debt to throw these massive parties. And I think that's a wonderful thing from the coronavirus, that we now can see that we don't need that in order to have a meaningful event.
But I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, look, the mitzvah is a little while off for my son, and I'm not really in that stage in my life, but I absolutely agree. I think outrageously expensive weddings when people can't afford them, that's not the spirit. I guess for me, it's being able to celebrate with your friends and family. And, yes, a small wedding could well happen now with those people, but for example, people, relatives abroad, or, elderly grandparents, it's just not possible. So I think I absolutely agree. The scale is something that has occasionally got out of control, and I don't think that's something we should be saving. But I do think there's a question for people, is my grandparent going to be at my wedding? Is my aunt who's abroad? And I think those challenges are, it's still tough for those couples, whether or not they want the sort of frippery. They do want the family there, and that's not necessarily possible at the moment.
That 100%. Of course, everyone wants their family, but that's really what I think what we were focused on. We were focused on the essence of who is there, rather than the big weddings.
I think there's something in between. The Shiva house, the house of mourning, which was taken online, and that has been transformed out of all recognition, from what I can see. And the mourners have basically taken control in a very strange and wonderful way. And they really do memorialize the person who's gone, and the loss of they're suffering. And people can engage in a very, very wonderful way by participating on Zoom meetings, etc. So I think certain things have really been radically changed by people making these decisions by themselves. So I think that's also some part of the phenomena, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I thankfully, and I'm very happy to say, I haven't been to a Zoom Shiva. I haven't had cause to, and I know a lot of people have. I know, unfortunately, that has been an experience for many people, that they've had to make that choice in the last few months. I think it's each to their own. Some people, I'm sure, get huge amounts of value of having a house full of people when they're sitting Shiva. Others, the quiet would be, gratefully received, and the ability to kind of have people tune in at set moments. I think the fundamental question is choice. We're in a position right now where we don't necessarily have a choice over how we do things. A member of my family had a bris yesterday. They had a very small number of people there present, the rest of it over Zoom. And for some couples, that will be absolutely what they want. But others would want more people there. And I think the tragedy of this situation, and the tragedy of the coming months, is people aren't really in a position to make that choice. And people are going to have memories that and have sort of rites of passage that are very coloured by what is possible and what is allowable at that moment.
Just for those out of towners, a bris is a circumcision. Miriam, you're not going to say that that we don't want to encourage social parties, etc., because that's also about being Jewish as well, isn't it?
Right, of course. I'm not saying we should be, become extremely Spartan. Everyone should only have 10 people at the event. Absolutely not. You want the people you care about. But I do think that, as I said, simply being able to, this has helped people refocus on the away from the material needs towards the people who are important, towards what really makes a simcha a happy event. And also resist some of the social pressure, which people found hard.
Jennifer, just to put your words back to you, the way that you concluded that article, you say a wedding isn't marriage, just like a bar mitzvah doesn't truly make a boy a man. It's what happens next that counts. But it's a start, the first rung on a ladder, something that unites a couple today with Jews the world over throughout history. In some ways, it is everything. For those facing cancelled weddings, hold on that bit longer. It's worth the wait. And I think that's a good sentiment to leave it at that point. I'm now going to talk about something which we actually haven't really dealt with a lot in this series, and I had wanted to, so this is a good opportunity, and that's what's going on with children and particularly with education. And Miriam, to remind you of an article that you wrote again in May 15th, Time to Rethink the Way We Teach Our Children. And you started the article by saying this: it's 10:30 a.m., which means that it's time for my children's Hebrew class. The two youngest jump on Zoom, where they meet 20 or 30 other kids, mostly strangers. Before long, they're discussing their favorite foods in Hebrew. Sadly, most kids cite pizza and pasta, which doesn't exactly increase their vocabulary. It isn't run by a school. It's run by the UJIA in partnership with the Jewish Agency. It begs the question, since coronavirus has forced practically every business to reimagine itself and forced schools to reimagine prayer services and Jewish lifestyle events, perhaps this is a good opportunity to reimagine Jewish education. The model I'd like to come to Jewish life is an American website called outschool.com. Miriam, can you tell us a little bit about that platform?
It's been the most unbelievable, fantastic experience, outschool.com. Basically, it is a platform where teachers can create classes. They will then teach to children across the world. They charge a small amount. Sometimes there are a series of classes, sometimes an individual class. They charge a few dollars per class. And the subject matter is extremely broad. There's science, art, mathematics, computers, silly, frivolous things, drama, you name it. You can take a class on this thing. It was on this platform. It was really built for parents who are homeschooling their kids originally. But when coronavirus happened, it suddenly had this whole new audience, people like me who absolutely do not homeschool their kids. And actually the reason I was going on was because I really didn't have time to homeschool my kids. It's just the most amazing experience. You can pick the classes that you want. So you're getting the classes that the kids genuinely are interested in, and then you rate the teachers, you get to know some of the other kids sometimes. It was a fantastic experience, and I really wanted to see something like that in the Jewish world as well. It's part of being able to take advantage of this new Zoom world and really offer children something that where they get to choose the Jewish studies that are really interested in them, and also about sharing resources, which again, as I think the schools are going to come under financial pressure, is going to become a lot more important.
I think we've all suffered Jewish education, but Jennifer, what is your understanding about how the schools are faring? Do you know anything about what's going on out there?
So I've not got a school-age child. I have a son who's at nursery, and I have to say it's interesting to watch schools there are a lot of questions over them reopening. My son's been back at nursery since the beginning of June. he is there every day, and it's absolutely fine, and the nursery have handled it fantastically. So I do think that there should be a way to enable schools to open as normal in September. I think the area I probably know a little bit more about is youth movements and informal education. I came up through the youth movement system myself, and it gave me a huge amount throughout my life, and it gave me a huge amount of my Jewish identity. And I think there is a real worry. I spoke to a number of young people from the different youth movements recently, and I think there is a real worry about what the future holds for them. Financially, a lot of them are struggling. They haven't been able to run most of their summer programs, which are kind of their big sort of money-making aspects. They're not for profit, so they're not in it to make money, but they do need to be able to make enough to stay afloat. And I think as much as schools are really important, I think protecting our youth movements, ensuring young people have the chance to meet other young Jews in fun, in social, in educational settings is so crucial. And I really hope that over the next few months, as well as that focus on ensuring schools reopen, as a community, we look at what support those youth movements are needing and make sure that the next generation of kids doesn't miss out and doesn't lose out on those opportunities. And the final point I'd make on that is that a lot of our young people are at Jewish schools, but a lot of our young people are not. And the ones who are not at Jewish schools, who don't have access to that Jewish life, they're the ones who youth movements are so, so important for. And really, it's about creating the next generation.
If I could just add one thing, that it's not just about the schools reopening, because of course most of our schools are state aided, not all, but almost all of them are state aided. So I think the schools will all find a way to reopen, right? Because for that part, they don't depend on communal money. But will they be able to provide the same level of Jewish studies? Will they be able to provide any Jewish studies at all? Because of course that is where they rely on voluntary contributions. And there we're already seeing signs of distress from the schools. There are already schools that are fundraising enormously, and that's fantastic. They've been able to raise some of them have been able to raise a lot of money, but you can't do that forever. The schools cannot, the Jewish side of them cannot be sustained by fundraising forever. People will give once, they'll give twice, beyond that they're paying school fees, and that's the whole point. A lot of people right now cannot. So I think we might see schools reopening, but the Jewish side is going to really suffer. And then when you put that together with exactly what Jennifer was saying, that the youth movements are going to suffer as well. In a way, you are creating, we are at risk of perhaps creating a little bit of a lost generation where the children aren't really getting strong Jewish studies in the schools anymore because the schools are under financial pressure, specifically on the Jewish side. The youth movements are going to find it impossible to operate and going to run out of money. And the other thing is that many of them will not be able to take 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds to Israel, which is a whole other question, breaking that really formative experience that a lot of our kids have going to Israel. And plus some of these kids are not going to be able to go to synagogue. Beyond, we're talking in general terms here about our Jewish identity, but actually when you think about it, it is the youth who are really at risk of kind of a Jewish desert at the moment. And, you can do that. That's okay for 6 months. Not that it's really okay for 6 months, but, we can, as a community, we can survive that for 6 months. But when you then have 1 year, 2 years of kids who are not getting Jewish education, not going to Jewish youth movements, not being able to take their gap year in Israel, that becomes a long-term problem for us.
I think, and we were doing so well. I thought it would be positive and upbeat. I'm not sure, Miriam, I can let you get away with that totally, because of course, when people are actually meeting, even in strict isolation, they're finding ways of reaching out to their friends in Zoom and other activities. So I don't think it's fair to be totally negative on that. And I think Jewish identity is probably very, very strong as well. So when they went to summer camp last year, they want to go back to summer camp this year, and there will be demand for the summer camp next year. And I think parents will very much want to encourage that. So I'm hoping there's a little bit of a more positive spin.
I mean, I think that's very optimistic, but what about the kids who weren't going on summer camp, who were going on summer camp this year for the first time?
Yeah.
I think the problem is there are kids who are going to be engaged whatever happens because they have parents who are focused on it, who it is a priority, but not every child has that, and not every child has that opportunity. And I think you can add into that mix, of course, who knows what's going to happen with universities, but JSOCs on campus are going to face a very different situation. All of these things, they're parts of a whole, but they do add up to creating Jewish identities, and they're formative. I have a Jewish identity because of the experiences I had as a child in shul, as a teenager at youth movements, and as a student at university. And I think my Jewish identity has been shaped by that. And I do wonder that some of those kids will get through it, and some of those kids will, this will be a blip. But there will, I think, unfortunately, be kids who are lost along the way.
But Miriam, the outschool.com, you saw that as possibly being an answer to Jewish education, and probably being better than it ever was before.
Well, I'd love to see someone pick up that mantle. As I wrote in the piece, there are some websites that try to do it, but they're mostly offering services to schools. But I really think that there is an opportunity here, exactly like the synagogues are offering events like this and are really rethinking how they reach people. I think that the schools on the whole, it's been a mixed bag. Some of them are great, really fantastic stuff. Some of them have been much slower. But what I haven't seen is a real grappling with this question of how do we, is this an opportunity to rethink Jewish education? Now, I understand why that's not happening. The schools are all under immense pressure just to deliver to their students, but there are opportunities here. There are opportunities here to reach people in new ways, to offer classes that that kids did not have access to beforehand. Maybe the thing about OutSchools, it's not the schools offering it, it's really the teachers. So I really think something like that would come from another organization. But I do think that the schools, for example, again, as they come under financial pressure, there are creative things that they can do, right? Talking about use of technology, why can't some of the schools band together and offer Jewish studies classes together, taking a lot of pressure off individual schools? Part of the reason we don't share a curriculum. There are other reasons as well, but with a little bit of will, I think it could be done, and that would, save Jewish education for a lot of kids.
I think that you're right. And I mean, I'm speaking to a lot of universities up and down the country, and they have really no idea what's going to happen in September. And they're trying to put timetables together in the virtual world. So it is not small issues and it's not small problems. But I think we're going to have to come up with answers, and we're going to have to come up with them very fast. And I think there is signs that things are happening. I think I'm going to have to wrap up very shortly, unless Jennifer, is there anything else that you wanted to say?
Not specifically. I mean, I think, that we've talked about some positives and some negatives. I think there's an opportunity for really good things to happen. I think there are some challenges, and I do think we need to be looking at those challenges and kind of working out how we can address them. But, we talked earlier about this isn't a war, but in some ways it's a sort of war in other terms. And it is for my generation, but probably for most generations who were born after the Second World War. This is the most seismic event that's going to happen in our lifetime. And I don't think we can emerge as we were. So we need to emerge differently, but we need to emerge better. And I really hope that as a community, we work together to do that, whether it's kind of, generating that educational platform and that collaboration, as Miriam says, or whether it's kind of changing how shul services is delivered. I think there is opportunity, and I'd like to be positive about what the future will bring.
I'm going to stop you there, just in case you go negative. I think that's a wonderful place to stop. So thank you very much to Jennifer and Miriam. And also, I think it's Gila Ansel-Browner from Jerusalem, Stephen Richter. Who knows? Maybe they got some of the answers, and they might have been inspired by some of the things that you said. So I'm going to now hand us on over to Madeline Abramson. Madeline, are you there?
I am here. Really just falls to me to say thank you very much to Jennifer and Miriam for a very interesting discussion. Both the optimistic and the not so optimistic were all worth hearing. Thank you very much. And to sadly say farewell to Where Are We Now? It's been a very successful series, and thanks to our media partners, the JC, for supporting this. Thanks to our technical team headed by Leo Mindell, and mostly thank you to Gabriel for thinking this through and for hosting us every week. So it may be the end of Where Are We Now, but it's not the end of Hampstead's virtual programme. So I'm going to hand back to Gabriel, who's going to describe what is happening on Sunday morning.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Yes, one series ends, another starts again. So this coming Sunday, 11 a.m. UK time, 11:05 Hampstead time, we're all going to be going to Australia. So this is going to be a live event. So you're going to be meeting some members of the community over in Australia, finding out how they've been doing, and also to hear some wonderful stories that's been going on in their community. And on top of all that, we're also going to be giving you some travel ideas once international travel returns. So lots happening. It should be great fun. 11 o'clock this coming Sunday, same channel, theus.tv. And I'm going to whisper this with a new media partner, the Jewish News. But for now, thank you very much for everybody involved in this series. Thank you very much, and good night.